Hey everybody! Welcome to Jon Ferrian Live. We're here on Sunday night, our regularly scheduled time for a change. It's been a few weeks, we've been a little off cycle, but thank you guys for jumping in and watching. So as you're coming in, let us know where you're watching from. We always love to see all those incredible cities and states and provinces that people are watching from. And tonight is no different. So as you're coming in, drop your location where you're watching from. If you're in Wyoming, if you're in Maine, if you're in Quebec, wherever you're at, let us know. So we got Jon Ferrian Live tonight. We are going to be doing a show with Chris Macdonald. This is an incredible story, folks, guys. We were on our phone just last night. Chris was telling me a story about an avalanche that him and his buddy were involved in just yesterday. This is fresh, hot off the press. Chris is passionate about getting the word out and helping others be safe and make good decisions. And so that's what we're going to talk about tonight. But before we do, the general tone and what we do on this show and what it's about, Jon Ferrian Live comes to you every Sunday night, 7 p.m. We talk to you about snowmobile safety. We talk to you about snowmobile education. We talk to you about positive growth of the sport. Just last week, we had a fun episode about the phaser gang and all those folks over there. Or maybe, I don't remember, I'm losing track. We had Isaac Sample. We did a little bonus episode this morning of his first mountain riding experience. We were supposed to tonight do an incredible walk-around tour of a sled bus from Cameron Beck down in Tahoe, but they got hammered with Snowmageddon down in Tahoe this week. They're getting feet upon feet of snow down in California this week. Avalanche danger is going to be high, so I know my friends down there are playing it safe. God bless them. Let's keep them safe down there, guys. Make sure everybody's doing the right thing. While we're getting ready for the show, don't forget to share this out. Make sure you're sharing this out, folks. We're going to have a good story tonight to talk to everybody about, and everybody's going to want to know what's all going on. You know what? I've got my settings set to friends only. Let me see if I can get that adjusted here. Boom. I'm going to go on Facebook Live here while we're on the show and get that adjusted. That's what happens. Sometimes we do a software update. All right, guys, bear with me. I'm going into Facebook, and I'm changing the settings on the show live as we're going. All right. Edit my post, and we are going to go public. We are now public, everybody. Now you can save it. We are now public. All right, guys, sorry about that. We had the new software update, too. Now I can see everybody's comments. Thank you for jumping in. Again, here we go. So tonight we're going to talk to Chris Macdonald again in just a second. Share this out. Let us know where you're watching from. But before we do, the Share and Win contest tonight is all about the Fly Racing gloves. We have the 907 neoprene gloves. These are my absolute favorite gloves I've been riding with all season. I actually ordered a second pair because I was getting them wet the first half of the day and then having to put different gloves on. I didn't like that, so I ordered a second pair so I could ride with these pair of gloves all day long. As you guys know, when you're digging in the snow and getting your sled unstuck, you're always going to get them a little bit wet. But these are great gloves for good grip on the bars. They're windproof on the back and all of that. So, all right, let me go ahead and drop the screen here. So Chris will be ready in 3, 2, and 1. Hey, Chris, welcome to the show tonight. How are you doing, my friend?
Pretty good, John.
Good, good. I'm going to make sure we got sound coming in here. I got a little sound coming in. All right. So Chris and you got to meet me and I got to meet you, it sounds like a couple of years ago at one of our Thunderstruck premieres at the Sled NWAC event, probably in Bothell, right? Is that where we met the first time?
Correct.
Yeah, and so since then we've been Facebook friends, and it's you'd called me yesterday and you'd shared that, hey, I know, John, you're getting the message out about a lot of great things. I've got a story to tell you, holy smokes, and we're going to get into that tonight a little bit. But before we do, let's let everybody know a little bit about who's Chris Macdonald and what's your background, where are you from, how long you been sledding, where do you live, all that fun stuff.
I currently live in Snohomish, Washington. Been sledding about 15 years out here on the West Coast, a little sledding on the East Coast where I grew up. But real terrain on the East Coast to snowmobile like us West Coasters like to do now. So
exactly. I'm from Minnesota as well, and so yeah, it's all about just trail riding and a little lake run.
Short track and going fast, yeah.
Exactly. And then we got to get out here in this big terrain and figure out what the heck's going on, right? That's part of this mountain riding.
It's fantastic. I really, really enjoy it. It's a good thing for me.
That's awesome. And so you've been living in Washington for how many years now? You've been here a long time, right?
Over 20 plus. moved out here in the late 90s.
Yep. And so 20 plus years here in Washington. And it sounds like on our phone call we had a little while ago, about 15 years ago, you started getting back into snowmobiling here in Washington and mountain riding. So tell us a little bit about 15 years ago, what kind of sled did you pick up to start mountain riding?
And I actually got some deals on some used from a very friend of mine at the time. I started out with a Skidoo 137 track,
Nice.
600. And then I picked up another sled from my friend also. It was triple Mountain Max Yamaha short track.
Yeah. And so,
but look, far from stock.
It's all about ripping too. And so, what part of because you live what part of the Washington state? What city are you living in now? In Snohomish. So you're only about 30, maybe 40 minutes north of me. I'm in Sammamish. You're in Snohomish. And so I know most of the people who live up in your area have a tendency to ride Mount Baker, Bear Paw, the areas up north versus coming
Correct.
south past me where I live. The I-90 corridor is right at my back door, and so that's where I head most of the time. And so you're kind of in that no man's land in the middle where you can go north or south, and it's probably about the same distance for you, right?
Well, technically Mount Baker's closer. It's my favorite place to go where I live. I can get to Stampede in about the same time from here than I can to Mount Baker.
Yeah. So,
another 40 minutes north of that. So roughly an hour and 50 to get to Mount Baker, over 2 to get to Bear Paw.
Yeah.
On the north side of Mount Baker.
And I've had the opportunity to ride many, many parts of the state of Washington, including Mount Baker. I've been up to Bear Paw, that Excelsior area right next door there. And for anybody watching the show that's not familiar with riding in Washington, Mount Baker and that area up in there is some big terrain, right? So Mount Baker itself is a active volcano, and the summit is over 10,000 feet high. The snow parks are somewhere down in the neighborhood around 2,000 feet at the lower end of the spectrum. And so it's an incredible gain in elevation from the low end to the high ends of the mountains where you can ride. And Bear Paw is an area on the north side of Mount Baker across the highway in the valley. Where literally it butts right up against the Canadian border. And again, being back there, it's some of the most epic terrain I've seen in the state of Washington, and definitely worthy of getting ahead of looking at things like avalanche conditions and seeing what's going on before you go up there, which is something, Chris, I know you and I talked about in regards to the avalanche. And for those who are wondering, the picture behind me on the wall is literally a picture from the avalanche yesterday that happened up in Bear Paw that Chris was involved with his buddy. And we're going to let Chris kind of tell the story about what his normal routine is going up to the mountains. Chris isn't just going up to these mountains blind and kind of making blind decisions and not being prepared. And so, Chris, before we even get into the avalanche yesterday, talk us through kind of what your normal routine is going up to the mountains, and how yesterday was either the same as your normal routine or if something was off cycle from your normal routine that led up to this avalanche. But let's just talk about your history and your preparation for riding this big terrain.
Well, normally I start out midweek watching the weather. That's the biggest goal. The big place I like to go, Bear Paw, Baker, plays a key for me is I don't like to ride it in poor visible conditions. I don't like to ride it in cast. I like to try to shoot the of getting sunshine or clear day, which we all know in Washington it's hard to judge. Most of the time with my radar app, we get precipitation. I dropped a couple pins on my phone to let me know the base of Bear Paw at Scriber Meadows, like an idea what the weather's doing right in there before I go. And that's how we usually is judge there by that. And then we have aviations. And as I learned yesterday I want to say false hope, it was low conditions and spread part on my how do you want to interpret that? Didn't read it well.
Yeah, and so I'll summarize for you a little bit. There is, checking the avalanche conditions as part of your normal routine, checking the weather as part of your normal routine, and getting out there. And what I think the other thing I want to highlight before we go into the specifics of the avalanche forecast yesterday is that you and I chatted about, I'd asked you the question on the phone, and you can answer it now, is, what is your background or history in some kind of avalanche awareness or education that you've taken in the past? Why don't you highlight that for us quick?
I've had a one years and years ago.
Okay.
But it would be best of me to try to educate. And things have changed in 20 years. So, a lot of new technology. There's a lot of things to pay more attention to than there was back 20 years ago when I started in this.
Yeah.
So yeah, some new thing is a definite must.
Yep. And
to
that's what a lot of these situations happen is it's kind of, we go into these things and a lot of times it's we feel like we're prepared and we get into our routine. And I think the word that I would use to describe my own writing sometimes is sometimes we get complacent about, like, we just take it for granted sometimes that, we've been to these same areas, we've seen these same forecasts, and we've got some experience, education, like yourself. I mean, honestly, the fact that you have a level 1 at all in the history, you're farther ahead than I would say 80% of the snowmobile community out there. And so kudos to you for taking advantage of that. I would agree with what you just said that, yeah, it's time to probably refresh and renew. Typically recommended a level 1 if you're going to do it is anywhere from 3 to 5 years. 3 years is probably the sweet spot where people would retake it every few years. I'm at that point myself where it's been about 3 years for me since my level 1. So going into this next season, I plan on re-upping and or maybe even getting into a level 2. I just got to note that there's for anybody who's interested, actually, I'm going to throw this out there, I believe it's in Colorado, but there's a level 2 Avalanche class with Tyler's Backcountry Awareness that there's still a couple of spots open on, and they've sent me a link with some discount codes if anybody is interested either in the area or wants to fly out to Colorado for that class. I'm just going to throw that out there now. Feel free to send me a private message after the show, and I'll respond back to you with the details. I know they're looking to fill up that class, so I've had Tyler's Backcountry Awareness is actually Brian Lundstedt is the guy who managed and owns it. His brother was the one who passed away in an avalanche named Tyler, so that's where the name came from. But anyway, back to our story here, which is, you've gotten into this routine, and to some degree, I think we all fall into this trap. I know I do personally, even, is we get complacent with feeling like we're familiar, whether it be with the conditions, the avalanche conditions, and all that. And then you get into, I think a lot of people fall into this too, and I don't know if you can tell me if this is accurate or not, but I think a lot of us fall into the trap of looking at just the color codes, and if it's green, if it's yellow, if it's orange, if it's red, and we kind of in our heads interpret that a certain way without maybe reading the details of the forecast that day and what the specific problems are. So I'll turn that back over to you and let me know if you feel like you read the avalanche forecast thoroughly in advance and or in hindsight, and what you've done to review that in the last 24 to 48 hours.
I'll admit I did. Looked at the colors, were good. Let's go. The conditions are low, but not getting a full understanding of the weather that was there. It was 20 degrees, 90 degrees when I hit the park and unload, and the wind was howling. So it had to be very close to freezing, like sub temperature. It was clear. Well, I got good vision. We're clear. It's good. Let's go. And you're right. I complacent, just to myself. I normally do. Didn't slow down to let it sink into that each area you go into, even though, I don't understand why they call it that, but there's like 5 different fingers, 5 different lakes, and 5 different places you drop in. You go in and it's just massively large. And we came up the first ridge, got up to the top, dropped down, came back up to the ridge, and my friend Chris was doing a couple pulls, and I was filming the phone, the shovel out, and I just spent a little bit more time. Shovel out, the snow down. I got up 12, 13 inches before it got solid. So about at the ridge, 13 inches of fresh snow.
Okay.
My mistake was now that the next ridge over where the slide happened, I didn't bother to check the conditions physically. I just assumed that there was 12 inches when it was way deeper with preloaded wind slabs that look smooth. That's what caught me. I made an epic mistake that almost cost the kid his life.
Yeah, and so, let's talk a little bit about, like I said, you did the kind of the pre-check in advance with the shovel, and you and your buddy were riding. I mean, how many hours or minutes or whatever you want to call it were you into your day before you got to this hill that ultimately became one of the issues? And then we'll talk about that specific hill. But how long have you been riding that morning already?
When we unloaded in the morning, we'll go back a little bit. We discussed that one on a hill at a time, try to watch out for one another. It's just 2 of us together. And usually radio communications to stay in the lower channels on our BA radios, put a stronger signal out.
Mm-hmm.
It seems that there's two of us, we'll run the Glacier's channel, which are 3.
Okay.
So we're on a low number, and if we get any static, run into any problems, we can try to, for help. And we took off. So, we left. I don't think we were an hour and a half into riding that day when that happened yesterday.
Yeah. And it sounds like, checking the forecast, checking the weather, those are all best practices. You even went as far as to dig in the snow a little bit and try to get an eye for the snow. And something else you shared with me on the phone, I don't think you've mentioned it yet. If you did, forgive me for bringing it up again, but you and your buddy had discussed kind of call it a best practice or a plan of action for the day in regards to, okay, there's only 2 of us. We need to have, one person on the hill at a time. So just talk a little bit about that. Like, what expectations did you set for you and your buddy as you were riding with just the 2 of you in this area that day, as far as, your routine or your best practices for riding the hills that day?
Well, Chris was riding with my friend of mine. Chris was riding with me yesterday. He had never been to Bear Paw.
Okay.
Yesterday was his first day. He was excited to go. We went to Baker several weeks ago with him and another friend, and we had a great time on the marine side because they'd never been over that side, which is the right side. But kind of touch base, one person on the hill at a time, try to keep an eye out. It's a big area. There's a lot of time, and I'm very, very guilty of like, it's the same way. You get in there, 4 guys with you, everybody discuss what's going to go on, and you start one direction, one guy goes the other direction. And I have another very good personal friend of mine, Mike, to call him. He doesn't like to let you leave his sight.
Yep.
So always stay where you can see people, never leave. If you lose to somebody, that's when you start talking on the, where are you?
Yep.
So you get a general idea of to stay together so you can keep track of who's where. But that's started, and it's just so big in there. You start, but you're over here and your buddy's over there to the right and you're to the left, and it's pretty soon.
Well, it's like, it's like freaking Disneyland up there, man. Like, I've ridden that area up there, and I can tell you, like, it's like once you get going and the adrenaline's running and you're climbing some of these hills or side hilling, and you get to the point where you feel like you've ridden an hour and a half and things aren't moving on you, and I just still do it, right? It's like and again, I think that's the thing I really want to resonate with people who watch the show. This show isn't about, Chris here telling a story about he made a, quote unquote, a dumb mistake, and we're supposed to like look at him like he's a fool for doing it. That's not what this is about, guys. This is about us realizing and recognizing, even in myself, the mistakes that we make on a regular basis. We can go into our days with the purest of intentions and the best ideas of what we're going to do right. But in that moment of adrenaline, as we're riding and as we get around our buddies and you lose track of them for just a minute, things can just like that change in a heartbeat. And that's the next step of the story that I want to talk about is you and your buddy. If there's anything else you want to talk about leading up to it, let me know. Otherwise, let's just go to that moment where you and your buddy talked about, let's get up on top of this ridge and go grab lunch, right? But is there anything else we want to hit first?
We were in the bottom of that bowl, of that picture that's behind you.
Yep.
The very bottom of that, and it's a very narrow drainage. The down you go, and turned around down there, and I said, well, let's get up to the ridge where the ridge before is where I dug a little bit with a shovel.
Yep.
Get up to the top of the ridge, grab a little lunch, and then we'll figure out what to do, because we'd already gone over drainages, and the conditions got worse. It was very icy, very snow. So I'm like, well, let's just go. We'll go up. Let me go up, and we'll sit, and we'll go have some lunch. And I took off and across that's behind you. I'd already gone across the same twice.
Okay. And
the time I crossed it, as I cut across it, fractured underneath me, and in front of me, the whole hill was coming down. I couldn't see the fracture was in front of me. I just saw a giant, like a snake coming at me.
Yeah.
The sled kind of washed like it was gonna, like the old Skidoo. I don't know. You ride a bunch of different machines. I can't keep track of you ride now, but I have a 14 Skidoo also. The spindle design got changed, so when you're trying to ride on a side hill, it will always tractor you and turn you and make you go up straight up the hill.
Yeah.
And it kind of felt like that. Like it buckled me, and then that's when it tried to walk me up the hill, and then I was looking at the hill hill and saw that wave, I thought, I don't even know what I thought. You know, to be honest with you, the only thought that crossed my mind was, don't stop, give up.
Yeah.
And I just held the throttle to the bar and said, I'm going to go until I can't go no more, and I'm going to abandon it and pull the back.
Yeah.
I tried to get both hands on the handlebars at the same time. And I don't know how but I managed to finish cutting across the face of this Avalanche that was moving and rode clean out on top of it. But when I got out the top of it, then I turned and stopped and looked over my left shoulder, how large it was.
Yeah.
And then that's when sheer panic said, "Where's Chris? Where's my buddy?"
Yeah. And so,
he's somewhere down there. I don't know if he was to me, to the right, and then I went to pretty much panic mode.
Yeah.
Like, if I want to go back down, I got to go back down past all that to find him.
Yep.
And I still couldn't see him. I could see the whole debris on my left side as I was going on that channel, and I just heard him yelling on the radio.
Okay.
Avalanche, 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 in a bunch of entities, and I don't think he knew what he was saying, but he was. It's me, but he caught. Ended up. I don't know if he was the tail end of it when he turned up when it clobbered him, but he did say I was swimming, go the sled, just took off, and when I came down the hill, this was literally running, like for the end zone, running, screaming the whole time. I've never seen anything like it, and I just pulled up beside of him. I said, "All right." He said, "We need to go. We need to go. We need to go." I said, "You're in shock."
Yeah.
"Are you okay?" "Yeah." "All right. We need to get my sled. We need to go." "All right. I need a minute to get to your sled because now we got to ride back up to where you're at in that debris field.
Yeah.
Get it out of there before we hear another avalanche."
Yeah. And if anybody goes into the pictures that I shared earlier about this, you know, we shared this last night after you had asked me to, just to get the warning out, right? I mean, your concern when you called me, that what I interpreted from it is we had I don't even want to call it a close call. We had an incident, and heaven forbid this happens to anybody else up there tomorrow, meaning today. Like, today people were up or riding today. It's a bluebird day up in that area. The conditions aren't that much different yesterday than they are today. And your biggest concern, you told me, other than your own guys being safe, was I want to get the word out about this to make sure this doesn't happen to somebody again tomorrow, right? And so
Sure.
We shared those pictures, and if you go and click in those pictures, you can see the picture of your buddy Chris's snowmobile in the debris, near the edge of the debris, to where if it hit him, he was able to kind of climb out, swim out, run out, however it was. And you can actually see his footprints leaving the avalanche debris to where the photo was taken from. You know, a lot of the photos are taken from. And so the way you've described it, the pictures there kind of tell the story of what happened. And, I asked you before the show, it's like, this is a tough question to ask and answer, but like, why was Chris down below you? How did that happen? How did you guys get into a situation where one person was below the other, in spite of the fact that you talked about it? And frankly, your answer to me was, I'm not sure.
I have no explanation for it.
Yeah.
I don't.
And it's in spite of the best intentions of doing it, and you heading up this hill and it triggering. I think your buddy, to your point, was probably hanging back and waiting for you to get up the hill. And at the point that he thought it was safe, was maybe starting to move in on the hill, and that's when it broke. It would be basically.
Yeah, it's telling he could have tried to go to the left. I don't like I said. There's ways out of that specific chute that you could go the way I went, right up the face of that, or further up to the left. I assumed he was left side because that's the last spot I seen him when I turned to go up.
Yeah.
Was he was on the left side of the trees on the side of the ridge.
Yeah.
But again, not taking the time to clarify and make that a priority, which I don't think I'll make a mistake ever again.
Yeah. And so what else about the day or the story, or what else do you want to share with everybody, and what message do you want to share with everybody today?
I think mainly is the average conditions, even though, it's not gimme is the main thing, is where I wanted to express that. I mean, it's in the green and yellow tree line, which means, and I've ridden in orange, and I've also ridden in red and not on anywhere near anything over a 35-degree angle, just stayed in trees.
Yep.
Majority, 90% of the time we played smart.
Yep.
and I thought it was playing it smart. I just misread the actual physical conditions
Yeah.
when I got there. When a drainage over, that's when I should have, 2 drainages over, that's when I should have paid more attention and said,
Yeah.
we shouldn't even be in here. We should get out.
Yep. And you had mentioned to me on the phone too that you were trying to read the terrain, and the terrain, the way you were reading it, there was other parts of the mountain where you did see kind of waves or wind drifts up in the mountains that were in this area that you were in, and where it actually ultimately slid was very smooth. So describe the bowl that you were in and what were there, and the fact that you didn't notice that it was a wind-loaded slope at the time.
I didn't, because I misread. Like I said, that was the north side of that bowl that slid. The sun was coming up over the ridge in front of that photo.
Yeah.
It's kind of a weird angle where it was at with that photo. I took it. The whole hillside was in the shade.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't realize it was preloaded with that much snow, except for the time I went across it, it was smooth versus the south side and the west of that ridge, all wavy. Like I tried to side it and it was like just bouncing in. I'm like, that's me, that's wind loaded. I don't want to be on that. I go to the smooth side and thought I was safe. And it was the polar opposite of not safe at all. It was twice as deep over there and smooth. It should have been the dead giveaway.
Yeah, and the other piece too is looking at the Avalanche, just kind of the color codes and making some assumptions versus reading is, when you called me last night, the first thing I did after we hung up was I went and I looked at the Avalanche forecast, and just to see, because I know in the phone you were initially said it was green, and I'm like, wait a minute, let me go look. And it was green below and at tree line, but above tree line it was actually yellow, which we've talked about now on the show, and that's accurate. But it was that initial kind of that thought process of it was green, right? I think that was kind of where your head was at right away. And then when I read it, if you don't mind, I'm going to actually read the bottom line part of the forecast from that day, because I think in hindsight, and you told me this on the phone just before the show tonight, is that in hindsight, reading the forecast and what you ran into, it should have been more on your radar, right? And I think
Correct.
the lesson.
Correct. I should have paid way more attention to that instead of just in the green and even the exploded view map that the end puts out.
Yeah.
Look at the map, all green and some yellow spots, and like, we're golden. Let's go. Right. We're gonna have a good day.
Yeah. And literally it calls out what you ultimately ran into, which we'll talk about here for a second. It says the bottom line. I'm just gonna, this is the screenshot of the avalanche conditions here. It says, strong solar radiation may overcome the cold temperatures and easterly winds to create a small, wet, loose avalanches on sun-exposed slopes. So that's not what you ran into. In this case, this was a shaded slope. The next section of this, here's what it talks to. It says, move to shaded or lower angle terrain if you notice snow surfaces becoming wet and weak. If you venture into the alpine, which ultimately is where you guys ended up, identify and avoid large wind-loaded slopes steeper than 35 degrees on and steer clear of cornice formations. And so, if you read into it and you look at the details, the information was there, the Avalanche Center actually. And the great part about this, and there's really a good positive story here, Chris, that I want to make sure everybody understands, is that when an avalanche like this happens, so many times people are like, oh my gosh, I can't believe that just happened. And they're so embarrassed by it, they don't even talk about it with anybody. They don't even tell anybody it happened, right? And what I'm frankly, Chris, what I'm proud of you for is a couple of things. One is that you knew that we could get the message out by reaching out. You told me when you called, it says, John, I know you reach a lot of people, and I want to get this message out. And I told you the first thing I want to do is I want to put you in touch with the local Avalanche Center. And so last night, I think it was like 8, 9 o'clock at night, you were on the phone with folks from the Northwest Avalanche Center, providing information and data for them to confirm either what they had already written and or update what they needed to write. And we shared the photos with them and everything else too. And so being able to provide current relevant data to what you saw out in the backcountry that day, this being an extreme case of that, providing those observations to the Avalanche Center is how you get the message out, because everybody else who's reading that forecast the next day or the day after, now that new data is going to continue to help educate people, make them smarter, encourage people there. And I really want to just reiterate, guys, like there's so much more to the avalanche forecast out there when you look at it other than just the color code, right? And I see it over and over and over again. And it's something that my wife and I, as we go up to the mountain every single trip, it's part of our routine as we're driving up the mountain. We're reading the forecast. We already read it the night before, but we're looking for any changes. We're looking at, okay, well, what is the color? What is the bottom line? What is the elevations where we're going to ride today? And we're making decisions as we're driving up to the mountains about areas and terrain we're going to avoid. And that's the big part of reading that avalanche forecast. It's not about necessarily where you're going to ride as much as it is where you're not going to ride. Like if you knew some of this stuff was going on, you'd be watching more closely for, these wind-loaded slopes and stuff too. And sometimes, in spite of your absolute best efforts, and honestly, Chris, your story to me, you guys did a lot of things right? There was a couple of mistakes made, and there were things that you should have dug deeper, as you've already stated. But at the end of the day, there's a lot of things you guys did right. And sometimes it's just the will of Mother Nature of what's going to happen out there, and you just have to be prepared for the worst. And to some degree, you guys were. The mistake of your buddy being below you, that was unfortunate. That, hopefully won't happen again in the future. But at the end of the day, everybody made it out and survived the story, and you're here to tell it and help educate others.
Yeah, it was a crazy day. And the news like an hour and a half ago when I talked to him on the phone, I sent him a text. I texted him first thing to check on him, to see how he was doing and how he was feeling at 9 o'clock. Even before I spoke to you via text this morning, I sent him a message. How you sleep? How you feeling? What's going on? And he said, I slept really good. Okay. Like you and I discussed earlier, that a good shot of adrenaline like that makes you sleep good.
Yeah.
I just want to make sure mentally he was okay of trying to get out of that. It could have went 15 different directions. I'm thankful that it did. We got out in one piece. Yep. Broken windshield and a broken meter on him. That was it. But when we came out of there yesterday, there was guys in the first bowl that never came out of the first bowl. And when I went down to them, because we were leaving, Chris wanted to go. I don't blame him, and I want to go. My day's done. My season might be done, to be honest with you. Yeah. So we stopped at those guys that were trying to get up to us earlier in the day, and the one guy got up the ridge. And I said, I just triggered a very large avalanche back there. I would suggest not going there. Out of there, and they turned and went out. They left. But what Chris had texted me an hour ago and said he had two friends in the parking lot that were past where we were. And so it blew so hard yesterday up there, John. If you over the bridge, your tracks were covered. Like within an hour, minutes, you couldn't tell if there was 5 people down there or nobody down there.
Yeah.
But Chris had let me know that there were some guys stuck in the parking lot that morning that we went past, and they had come out, seen the debris field, and saw my marks going across the face of that, and then nothing. And they spent 2 o'clock. They went in there with beacons and searched the whole field to look for people.
Yeah.
So that was pretty cool to find out that somebody that had common sense or avalanche skills they see marks and nobody around a huge slide. Let's go. Our diligence to check.
Yeah. Yep. No, so, absolutely. And I saw in our post today, this morning, there was a bunch of comments that continued to feed into the post. And, I don't know who's who, but I could see people saying, hey, is this the one, type of thing, meaning that they probably saw the avalanche up there and everything too. And so, yeah, it's as big as this world is, it's a small world. I think there's a lot of people that get touched by these stories. And, I think even in the comments here as we're watching, Chris, I would encourage you, once the show's done, go into the comments and just kind of interact with the folks who are there. And I think if I saw it right, I think your buddy Chris is actually watching the show tonight with you, and he says,
sure.
I'm here. And so he's, want to say thank you to Chris Macdonald and Chris, your friend, both of you guys, for being willing to share the story. And I know it's hard, right? As far as a traumatic experience like that and a close call, you start second guessing everything, and that's normal, right? And so everybody goes through everything in this world in a different way. So Chris has given us a thumbs up in the chat box here. So he's acknowledging that we're saying hi. So Chris, thank God you're okay. We appreciate that, you made it through there, and that you guys collectively are willing to share the story to educate others, and for it to be so fresh and to be able to get this out in front of everybody is a really important message for everybody. And I just can't thank you enough, Chris, for this. And, there's people in here saying, let's share this out, get the message out, because frankly, February and early half of March is really prime avalanche season. This is the time of the year where there's enough snow and there's enough layers across the country, almost no matter where you're at, that there's risk there, and it doesn't go away anytime real soon. It evolves. But you know what? There's always good, fun snow and non-crazy avalanche terrain. If you want to, my encouragement for you, Chris, is just not to call it, hang it up for the season and call it cold turkey, but just, start back, get yourself grounded, get yourself familiar with it, and, work your way back up to whatever level of comfort you have with, terrain again. But the one thing I'll just tell everybody is avalanches only happen in avalanche terrain. And that's something you got to keep, in between, in your head. And this is a message for everybody, not specifically for you, Chris, but for everybody is, you know what? You can approach the mountains on a high danger day, a moderate day, a considerable day, a green day, and you can kind of mitigate and manage risk by getting the training and getting the education. But ultimately, not every time you're going to be able to see what's coming, right? And so being prepared for that, like you guys were, thank God everybody came out okay. So,
Yeah, absolutely.
okay. Any final thoughts? Any final words before we wrap this up tonight?
No, I said I would not like to bring it up for this and end on a negative note, but we'll see how it plays out.
Yep.
We'll just go from there.
If I can be part of you getting back on the snow and feeling safe and secure, I'd love to be part of that if you want to. I've got some trips planned coming up. I'll be out of state on and off for the next month, but I'll be around, just as much as I'm away. So stay in touch. Let's see if we get.
Absolutely. Thanks, John. Appreciate it.
Yeah. So everybody, just remind you that feel free. Messages like this are really important, and the only way we get the information out there is by sharing this, right? And so share this message to your personal page. If one other person sees it, you've made somebody else's life. If you share it to a sled page, a club page, somewhere where someone's doing mountain riding, and this is something that happens unfortunately more than we'd like to believe. And just getting this message out and sharing it is really what it's about. So help us do your part. Get the message out, share it out. God bless everybody. Don't forget to live large, meaning make the most of every day, make a difference in this world, and get out there and get after it. So thank you, Chris, for tonight. Appreciate you, sir.
Thank you, John.
All right.